Hi everyone. Elections are held in the UK for the National Parliament at Westminster, the parliaments of Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, local councils, and until Brexit, for the European Parliament. Voter turnout in local elections is traditionally low, with 40% and less. In the European election, it was often significantly lower. In 1999, 24%, in 2004, 38%. Also in general elections, the turnout, which was usually between 72 and 78% of those entitled to vote, has decreased significantly. In 2001 it was 59%, in 2005 61%, and so on. The traditional British electoral system is the relative majority system in one-person constituencies, also called first-past-the-post system. The constituency candidate who achieves more votes than any other of the contenders is elected as an MP. However, symbolically speaking, like in a horse race, first pushes his head past the finish post wins, so first past the post. The votes cast for the other candidates are not taken into account when allocating seats in Parliament. The whole country is divided into a corresponding number of constituencies for the election of the current 646 members of the House of Commons. The total number of constituencies reflects the population development. Care is taken to ensure that the population in each constituency is approximately the same. The boundary lines of the constituencies are adjusted by 4 independent constituency commissions or boundary commissions, one each for England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and that's at least every 10 years and no later than every 15 years. Any mentally sound Briton over the age of 18 who's not a member of the House of Lords is eligible to vote. To be elected, candidates must be 21 years old, not mentally ill, and not belong to the House of Lords. They must not be in a debtor, convicted of voter fraud, serve a lengthy prison sentence, hold certain public offices such as magistrate, civil servant, soldier, or policeman, and have not accepted paid crown office. The electoral system creates a close connection between the constituency and the MP. Because ministers must belong to one of the Houses of Parliament, if they are defeated in their constituency, they also lose any chance of government office. The elected MP is the traditional point of contact for all citizens in his or her constituency on all kinds of political and social issues, and is their ambassador in the London Parliament, or should be. He's usually well known in the constituency, but does not have to be a long-established person to have a chance at elections. During the election campaign, candidates often go door to door in their constituency in order to come into direct contact with a large number of citizens. A British election campaign is far shorter and cheaper than, for example, here in Germany, and uses advertising material such as posters or whatever. When a member leaves Parliament, by-elections are held in his constituency to appoint a new constituency representative. An average of 5 by-elections are held each year. They often take the form of government popularity tests. At the moment, the Tories failed with that. However, their results should not be overstated. They mostly reflect local circumstances or just tactical or temporary protest attitude of the population, but not this year. The trends emerging in the by-elections are therefore rarely fully confirmed in subsequent general elections. The first-past-the-post system is primarily a majority voting system. It regularly distorts the results of the votes in favor of the major parties, thereby generally ensuring clear majorities that make it possible to form a government without a coalition partner, as we usually see it here. At the moment it's 3. As a rule, only the major parties can calculate their chances of winning in a sufficient number of constituencies. The vote shares of smaller parties are only sufficient for victory in some constituencies, either because these parties have their strongholds there, or because, for tactical reasons, the supporters of one of the larger parties vote with those of the smaller party in order to get the other large party to vote in a certain constituency to strike with combined forces, so the so-called tactical voting. The result is that the small parties are underrepresented in parliament in terms of their share of the vote. For example, the Alliance of Social Democrats and Liberals achieved 25.4% in the vote in 1983, but received only 3.5% of the seats. Support for the Labour Party was only marginally higher with 27% in the same election, but they received 32% of the seats. In the 1997 election, the successor party to the Alliance, the Liberal Democrats, only achieved 16.8% of the vote, but their share of parliamentary seats grew to 7% thanks to tactical voting by many Labour supporters who voted for Liberal candidates. In 2005, the Liberal Democrats received 22% of the vote. The electoral system translated this share into a 9.6% share of parliamentary seats. Since the 19th century, critics of the British electoral system have been demanding that it be replaced by a fairer system, meaning one that better reflects the will of the electorate. In Northern Ireland, the underrepresentation of the nationalist population cemented by the majority voting system was one of the reasons for the outbreak of the Northern Ireland conflict in the early 1970s. Since then, the single transferable vote system, which is also common in the Republic of Ireland, has been enforced there for local, parliamentary and European elections. STV also leads to a greater consideration of smaller parties because more than one person is elected in each constituency. It's usually 5 or 6. The voters each have one vote, a single vote, and a number the candidates of the parties according to their respective preferences. The first person to be elected in the constituency is whoever has enough of the first preferences of the voters to reach a certain electoral number. This first count is not sufficient to determine all constituency representatives. In subsequent counts, therefore, the weakest candidates are removed from the count. The second, third and further preferences of the voters are then taken into account as a transferable vote to enable other candidates to reach the election number. This allows the relative strength of the parties in the electorate to be taken into account more clearly, so that both population groups are adequately represented in Northern Ireland. The STV also has been used in Scottish local elections since 2007. New voting systems were introduced for the elections to the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly, as well as for the 1999 European elections. MEPs in the European elections were elected by proportional representation using regional lists constituting party headquarters. The members of the Scottish Parliament are elected according to the additional membership system. That means a system that adds to the elected constituency MPs, elected MPs from regional lists according to the balance of power of the parties according to proportional representation. The process of political decision-making through elections is supplemented by the instrument of the referendum. In British politics, referendums were the exception rather than the rule before Tony Blair came to power. This is not surprising given that if the doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty is taken seriously, referendums cannot be binding on parliamentary legislation. Calling the population to the polls for just one kind of opinion poll, however, seems not only nonsensical but also politically unwise. No politician can afford to ignore the opinion expressed in referendums. Referendums therefore exist primarily for tactical reasons when the incumbent government did not want to be solely responsible for a decision. Failed referendums on the establishment of regional parliaments in Scotland and Wales in 1979 are an example, or if they wanted to avoid a decision due to a conflict within the government, the referendum on accession to the EC in 1975 with a yes vote of 67% and a turnout of 64% is another example. The Blair government relied on the referendum as an instrument for decisions in many policy areas. The Parliaments for Scotland and Wales in 1997, reinstatement of the London City Council dissolved by the Thatcher government in 1986, which happened in 1997, the peace agreement for Northern Ireland in 1998. In this way, it created legitimacy for the subsequent legislation of Parliament. The general elections of 2005 confirmed once again that voting behavior in Great Britain, as in all other Western democracies, is increasingly determined by issues and the presentation of candidates in the media, and less by traditional party affiliations. In the 1960s, the party preference associated with the social situation of the individual voters could be determined relatively clearly. The Conservatives were seen as the party of business and landowners, that means the middle class and the rich, while the Labour Party's redistribution demands were particularly attractive to working class and the poor in the population. In 1964, about 3/4 of middle-class voters supported the Conservative Party, and 2/3 of working-class voters supported the Labour Party. In 2005, while correspondingly different profiles of Conservative and Labour voters were still discernible, the Labour Party's share of middle-class and working-class voters had converged significantly, and the same is true for the Conservative Party's respective voter shares. In addition to the decreasing importance of socio-structural factors for voting preferences, a decline in party identification can also be observed. In 1966, 84% of voters identified strongly with one of the parties. In 2005, it was 45%. This makes it all the more tempting for voters to make short-term decisions based on personal interests as well as programmatic and candidate preferences, and to take into account the pros and cons of an election decision, which primarily affects their own wallet. British voters are reacting less and less to political alternatives on the basis of specific beliefs and more as consumers of the policy on offer. Regionally, support for the Labour Party was concentrated in Scotland and Wales and the northern major cities of England, although they lost a lot in Scotland. In southern England, it is often the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats who compete for votes. In addition to traditional structures of party competition, there is now competition for key political competencies. Which party do voters trust, for example, to ensure a flourishing economy or to guarantee law and order? After 1945, these key competences were traditionally assigned to the Conservative Party. 1997 was a turning point for the Conservative Party there. After the exit of the pound from the European monetary system, which was forced by the financial market in 1992, the party did not succeed in regaining economic and political opinion leadership. The Labour Party also distinguished itself as the hard-hand party in anti-crime politics. It also became clear that the Conservative Party had serious shortcomings in mobilizing young voters, voters from minority ethnic groups, and women voters. Even the entrepreneurial camp, on which the party could always count as an ally, no longer stood united behind its partly Eurosceptic program. Since Tony Blair's decision in 2003 to send troops to Iraq, but especially after his resignation, the dispute over key political competencies between party leaders Cameron from the Conservatives and Brown, who was Blair's successor at the time, had flared up again. Since Boris Johnson's election victory in 2019, many people have regretted the British electoral system now, but a lot has shifted since the Blair times. Labour lost, as I said, a lot of foothold in Scotland. Almost all seats go to the SNP now. And in the local councils, there was a big shift as well. And in Northern England, the so-called Red Wall, in the named 2019 election with Boris Johnson, Labour lost a lot of seats there. And that was all because of one topic, and not because of party affiliation, but one topic. It was Brexit. We will see how many people will regret their 2019 decision in the next general election. now with all the kerfuffle around Boris Johnson right now. But there were big shifts. But to sum it up, the first past the post system is one of the biggest problems for a lot of parties in Britain, and for shifts like this, and for the representation of the people. I am not a friend of the first past the post system. I know that on my main channel many of my UK viewers still do like it, because you don't need a coalition, you don't have to make compromises when you're in government. But at the same time, especially with the work of Boris Johnson to take a lot of competences away from Parliament and from the jurisdiction, this is a danger for democracy in my eyes. And so it is still important to think about this. And referendums are still important. The 2016 referendum brought Brexit. The 2014 referendum did not bring Skexit because they were told they can stay in the EU. That's why in 2023 there might be another Skexit referendum, because they are not in the EU anymore. And so referendums are still a big topic. But the electoral topic system as a topic will remain there for some time as well. And I hope I could explain it a little bit to you. Those systems are so complex. I just tried it with a few examples from the past, but I don't want to give you a 2-hour speech here. So I hope this overview was something that could give you at least a hint on the electoral system of the United Kingdom. And I'll see you in my next video. Schalt ein.